Thanks so much, Leon. And today we are taking a closer look at wealth, income, and workplace inequalities, how brands can really activate on their commitments to help to address these, and what the movement really needs from brands in order to push this work forward. We have a fantastic group of panelists here today to share their perspectives on this, and thank you all so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We have Gary Cunningham, who is the CEO of Prosperity Now. We also have Dr. Angela Jackson, who leads the Future of Work initiative at New Profit. We have Sarah Kay, who is the Vice President of Inclusive Solutions at Prudential Financial, and Angela Woods, who is the Senior Director of Corporate Citizenship for ESPN. So thank you all so much again for taking the time today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us, Mary.
Fantastic. And Gary, I'd love to start with you. You know, Prosperity Now has really been fighting this fight, doing this work to promote racial and economic justice for over 40 years. Can you give us a high-level overview of some of the work that you do?
Certainly. As you mentioned, Prosperity Now is a national organization focused on financial and economic inclusion for all Americans, but particularly focused on people of color. We create, identify, and scale system solutions that address the root causes of inequality and economic injustice. Our vision is to create a fair and just economy that is free from structural inequalities and racism, an economy where all individuals can participate in our society so we can have a fully functioning democracy here.
Absolutely. And over at New Profit, the Future of Work initiative really focuses on career readiness gaps and on preparing people for the workplace. Dr. Jackson, I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that to get us started here.
Yeah, thank you. And again, for having us. So Angela Jackson, managing partner at New Profit. The way that we're approaching our Future of Work strategy from a philanthropy perspective is thinking about how do we leverage our capital and impact investing in a way that creates a more equitable future of work. How can we, with our convening power, bring different people to the table to think about what needs to be true to give more people access to the workforce? And we think a lot about the 71 million US residents who don't have a degree and how many times, because they don't have a bachelor's degree, that they're counted out. And what we've tried to do with our initiative is really look at the ecosystem. And that's why I'm glad we're having this conversation to see where there's shared value. So the initiative that I'm leading, we're putting in money from our part and investing, but we're also working with employers. We're working with community-based organizations. We've actually stood up a frontline worker advisory board who's helping to inform our strategy and really thinking about it as an ecosystem play, because there's an acknowledgement that there's not going to be any one funder, investor, or company that will solve this problem. It really is going to be one where we'll have to make, like was said earlier, these social contracts of how we'll work together for this greater good.
71 million, that's a striking number that I'm sure we'll come back to as we move through this conversation. But similarly, Prudential and the Prudential Foundation are focused on these issues of financial security, economic equality. Sarah, can you get us started and let us know a little bit more about this?
Sure. Thank you for having me and representing Prudential here today. And so, yes, we were founded over 145 years ago on the basis of equity. And so when our founder, John Dredden, he started the company, his first product was burial insurance because he saw that working class families didn't have the financial means to bury their loved ones. And so with that first product, he was thinking about it. What does an inclusive market look like? What do inclusive products and solutions to allow everyone to have the opportunity to achieve financial security? And so our department, the Inclusive Solutions Department, we manage a couple of different financial resources that includes philanthropic grants, corporate contributions, impact investments, but also leverages our employee time and talent for a couple of different purposes. One, to help build a more inclusive culture to make sure that our associate experience is something where they feel supported and they feel like they can develop and grow, but also leveraging their talent and skill sets to help our nonprofit partners, our small businesses in the locations that we are in the process of locating in. And then also looking at how do we leverage the business capabilities and assets. So what are the products and services that Prudential provides? What are the assets, the business clients, the customers that we can have, that we can power that all together to help drive inclusive economic growth in the cities that we are located in.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And we kind of, as we move through this conversation, I feel like this is also something that we're going to keep coming back to, is that this work continues throughout the spectrum of people's lives, right? And it does start early and then go, it's a lifetime work. But we know that engaging youth is a big step for this. And back in 2014, former President Barack Obama really focused on this and launched My Brother's Keeper Alliance to help ensure that all youth can reach their full potential and really have access to a more level economic playing field. That program still exists today as My Brother's Keeper Alliance as part of the Obama Foundation. Let's learn a little bit more about that.
I want you to know you matter. There's nothing, not a single thing that's more important to the future of America than whether or not young people all across this country can achieve their dreams.
We are the ones to inspire our generation, to disrupt a broken system, to rise up, take action and stand for the idea of opportunity for everyone. We are the ones to change statistics, not just for the sake of young men like me,
take a look at this,
but for the sake of America's future, our future.
We're the ones to not give excuses, to not wait for permission to challenge biases. We just do.
If they won't put our faces in their boardrooms, we won't put our faces in their stores.
we're the ones to act, to bring our unique gifts and talent.
To make sure America lives up to its grand ideals for our children and our neighbors' children. Because our futures are all tied together.
If there's no seat at the table, we'll bring our own.
We are the ones to encourage, to speak
out,
up, to stand out. I am my brother's keeper. We are the ones. I am my sister's keeper.
I am my brother's keeper.
I am my brother's keeper.
I am my brother's keeper. We are the ones.
I am my brother's keeper.
Yo soy el guardián de mis hermanos. I am my brother. I am my brother's keeper.
And I want you to be too.
It's so interesting to see that video that was shot years ago and really look at it through the lens of where we are now. MBK Alliance recently started a new mentoring program in partnership with ESPN. Angela, I'd love for you to fill us in a little bit about that.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for starting off with the video. I will say that really began our work with My Brother's Keeper Alliance back in 2016 when they came to us and we worked with them on that branding campaign to really change the narrative that existed in America and still exists in communities today about boys and young men of color. So that was really the inception of our work, and we're glad and excited to see that it's scaled to where it is today with this new mentoring partnership that was announced. So really the impetus behind that was ESPN is committed, as is the Walt Disney Company that we're part of, to providing more resources to create access and opportunities for young boys and men of color and underrepresented youth in communities across the country. And we really see the work that we're doing with MBKA as a pathway to help them find their destination, to choose the path and see what opportunities might exist with them. So as part of this new mentorship program, we will have our employees serve as mentors. So they will help them with career counseling advice, educational guidance, helping them to define what their aspirations are and map out the future that they want to envision for themselves. So they really see the potential and the opportunity for what can exist for them beyond their immediate community or their surroundings, and really know what opportunities can be paid for them through the mentorship program that we will have with these young men over the next year.
Absolutely. And to get back to that conversation around work, around the future of work, Dr. Jackson, I'd love to come back to you really quickly. We know that so much of what's happening right now, what's happened over the past year, is shaping the future of work, even maybe just as much so as some of these other factors that have been going on for several years now. And we know that New Profit is looking to take this on a little bit through your 2021 Future of Work Grand Challenge. Can you fill us in a little bit more about that and about how you're looking to take on these issues?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, even before the pandemic, we had been thinking about the future of work and really the uneven impact that it would have on different groups of people along the lines of race and socioeconomic background. And so in doing that, we thought we could leverage our philanthropic dollars to maybe incentivize different behaviors around who are traditional candidates, who are worth investing in, at what level. And so we launched this Future of Work Grand Challenge in partnership with the X Prize Foundation and MIT Solves. And it was a $5 million challenge. And what we wanted to do was incentivize entrepreneurs to think about that 71 million US adults who don't have a bachelor's degree, how they could obtain new skills for the future that would position them for the future without necessarily going back for a four-year degree. And it's been spectacular. So we launched that in June of last year. We had over 1,200 people apply to the challenge. We have identified 15 solutions that we're going to actually validate in 6 communities across the country. And it was really important for us not only to surface this innovation and get entrepreneurs to thinking about this population who is largely overlooked, right? Because most innovators who are thinking about innovating in the HR space, they're doing it because they think that an employer will be their customer, right? And so if they don't see a customer, they're not really thinking about that target population. So we really wanted to solve for that piece of it. And we've seen a lot of entrepreneurs come with ideas to rapidly reskill people. And the entrepreneurs have said they've been wanting to do this. But again, for their business models, they didn't have a customer. And that's where brands and employers come in. Because if we set the incentives the right way, if we tell them we want to invest in entry-level employees, non-traditional employees, then they'll do that because they'll see a market there. And so that's what we're hoping to prove is this case around doing that. And, ideally get 25,000 people back to work, trained and back to work this year.
That's fantastic. And your focus on entrepreneurs, I know really dovetails with Gary's work, with some of the work that you're doing before the pandemic and then after, really focusing on entrepreneurs, particularly entrepreneurs and small business owners of color. Can you tell me a little bit about what you're seeing about how these entrepreneurs have been impacted by the pandemic and sort of what you're doing to step in and to help out there?
Yes, the impact on entrepreneurs of color, particularly African-American entrepreneurs, has been deep and have been tragic. 41% of Black businesses closed from February through May of last year. And this is a staggering number. Entrepreneurs face really 3 critical issues. One is a lack of access to capital. The second is access to technical assistance and support. And then third, access to markets. We've been working with the African American Alliance of CDFIs, Community Development Financial Institutions, that represent about $3.5 billion in lending to actually galvanize them along with the whole financial institutions to actually support African American and other people of color that are working to make a difference. If we don't make sure that this underpinning stays, then the economic base within the African American community actually gets eroded. And so we've been doing this work across the board, working on many different levels to ensure that we support both African American and other people of color that are in business. And the business community has stepped up big time to help us do that.
Gary, if I could just add, the point that you just made, Gary, was so important. Like, we always have to remind people that small businesses employ the vast majority of U.S. residents, right? And then when you go to entrepreneurs of color, or you go to women entrepreneurs, they employ more women. They employ, entrepreneurs of color employ more people of color. Yes. So these losses really have a downstream devastating impact, not only on those entrepreneurs, but also the people who are living in their communities.
I couldn't agree more.
Absolutely. And Gary, did you want to say anything in response to that as we move on here? Or
yeah, absolutely. The fact of the matter is, and it was mentioned earlier in this presentation, the Business Roundtable, and we've been, Prosperity Now has been working with them to develop a whole set of policy and actual practical things that the corporate community can actually do. So there is actually a roadmap It's out there. Actually, we're asking all the businesses, including those listening here, to actually get out and support. This is not like we can wait for something to happen. We really have to take action now in order to address what's happening during the pandemic for communities of color in this country. And so we're asking for your help and your support to do that. And I have some recommendations about that, but I'll hold for now.
Absolutely. This really is, that's why we're all here today, is it's really, we all know now is the time to act. None of us here, we think that there's any time to wait, and we really need to get moving on this. And I'd love to dive into some of the brand examples that we have here today and just really see if we can unpack some of those and give an example for maybe some other brands or folks that may be listening that really want to do more but aren't really sure where to start. Angela, I'd love to quickly come back to you and talk a little bit more about how ESPN plans to activate on this mentoring commitment with MBK Alliance and how you really see this as part of your broader vision to move closer to these goals around equity.
Absolutely. So with the onset of the program that we just launched, we're actually going to activate it in 3 markets. So it's going to be in New York, Los Angeles, and Washington, D.C. that are key markets for us and employee populations that we knew we could build upon and call upon employees from those markets to support the local MBK affiliates in those markets. And I will say the reason we really honed in on mentoring and why we thought it was a great fit for us from a culture perspective is really twofold. One, we believe that our employees are our greatest asset. So this allows us to leverage their expertise, talent and skill set in a way that's meaningful and personal to them. But we also recognize, based on research, that mentoring is something that is imperative, and particularly for kids of color. Based on recent statistics that we saw, that a young person who has had, or a young adult who has not had a mentor, or who has had a mentor, is 52% more likely to attend school regularly and 55% more likely to attend college. So that effect is even more profound when we talk about communities of color. When we look at the fact that 1 in 3 young people in this country will grow up and not have had an adult mentor in his or her life. And that problem is even more acute for young boys and men of color. So we really see it as an opportunity to leverage our greatest assets with our employees to serve a real need that we know, based on research, is really something cemented in these communities, can have a profound effect and provide a huge trajectory on the lives of these young men that we will touch.
Absolutely. That's so powerful. 1 in 3. That's just these statistics. I think we should all be taking note of as we go, because they're really just so striking and just underscore the urgency of this work. Sarah, I'd love to come to you really quickly to talk a little bit about some of the ways Prudential is activating, both in response to the pandemic and in response to some of these just overarching commitments you have around equity.
Yeah, I'll say, Prudential, for at least the last 40 plus 50 plus years, we've been dedicated to really thinking about how do we look at racial equity and justice issues. We've provided over $400 million of grants throughout the last 40 years. And right now we have an active portfolio of $100 million, really focused on dismantling systems and policies that address the structural racism, institutional racism that has existed throughout history. But then also looking at how do we provide access to quality education, quality jobs, wealth building tools and products, making sure that communities are thriving and have all the necessary amenities and services that we all want in our communities. And so this is work that has been existing for quite some time. So it's not something that all of a sudden, after what's happened in 2020, that we're taking a deeper look at, but something that we're continuing to build upon. But because of everything that's happened with the pandemic and with all of the national social unrest, with the recognition after the murder of George Floyd, we doubled down on our commitments. And so we made a couple of public commitments around racial equity that looks at not only our talent, but looking at how we're looking at promotions and mobility for our talent, how we're looking at our recruitment processes, what's the culture like, really making sure that we are looking at diversity at every single level of the company, all the way up to the board of directors. We're also taking a deeper look at our products, how we're designing them. Are we developing them that are culturally relevant, that are actually meeting the needs of diverse consumers? How are we marketing these products as well, too? It can't be one marketing campaign for every single population, but it really should be tailored to address the needs of where people are coming from. And then from a society perspective, not only doubling down on the existing work that we have done, but also now taking a look at what can we support in the criminal justice reform space, the police reform space, voting rights, to really make sure that we are providing opportunities for all. We have a deep focus on closing the racial wealth gap. We know that 63% of Americans don't even have $500 in their emergency savings, which was really laid bare the challenges that people face throughout the 2020 coronavirus pandemic. But then if you take a look at people of color, low wage earners, immigrants, the pandemic has had a disproportionate impact on them. And so how do we make sure that they have access to all of the appropriate financial products and tools and advisors, and be able to connect to good jobs, but then also have access to the resources to help build their wealth and protect their assets at the end of the day?
And if I could just add on to what Sarah was saying, I think similarly, as part of the Walt Disney Company, we have done the similar exercises to what Sarah is referencing with regard to Prudential on the heels of the murder of George Floyd as well, looking at what our diversity commitment is in terms of how we serve internally our own employees, what that looks like from a recruitment or retention standpoint, as well as what that means from a Black consumer experience. So what is their experience with the Walt Disney Company and all of our segments, whether they're going into our studios to see a Marvel or Pixar film, whether they're going to one of our parks or they're interacting with us from a sports lens. Really looking at what that experience is for the Black and African American community, both as employees, as diversity organizations that we work with, but also from a consumer lens. So I do think, to Sarah's point, it is called upon us as corporate America, the urgency to take and have these conversations internally to see what you're doing, not only for your internal infrastructure and employees, but how you are showing up for these communities as you represent yourself with your consumers.
And if I could just double down on what Sarah said, we've worked with Prudential a long time, and as a Prosperity Now, and we were able to work with Prudential to create 750,000 children savings accounts throughout this country. And we know that if a young person has a $50 savings account, they have a 4 times greater likelihood of matriculating through college. This is a big deal, because if we don't make that investment on the front end, we'll see what we're getting on the back end. And so I just like to say that the work that we're doing, we can't just work on the symptoms. We really have to work on the underlying conditions that create the situation that we're in. And we need to level the playing field. And we need to do it in a way that everybody's in the picture. So it doesn't matter what your race is, what your color is, you should be in the picture in your company, in your workplace, to ensure that everybody gets treated fairly, and that we offer opportunities for groups that have been historically denied the same opportunities that others have had.
And I would just add that it's like, yes, it's a moral imperative, and yes, it's a social justice imperative, but also for businesses, right, it's an economic imperative, right? And so people think, how do I make the case for this? And really, if you think about these consumers, I love the video saying, if you won't put us on your board, we won't shop in your stores. That's one of them. But I think to everyone out here, I would just encourage you to think about, what is your business's business model, and what are the different ways in that business chain and that value chain that you can integrate these practices. One point that we haven't talked about is like supplier diversity. I invest in entrepreneurs and upstarts. Those checks are pale in comparison to what they could make an entrepreneur if they were part of an organization's supply chain. So there's different ways that we can tackle that. And one example I'll just give is Accenture, and we work with them. They're a partner on the Future of Work Grand Challenge. The way that they've worked with us on the shared goal of getting 25,000 people back to work who've been impacted by COVID is, one, yes, they gave money, which is great. 2, they engaged their employees. We had a pro bono consulting team that actually helped us design a frontline worker advisory board. We also leveraged their ability to do communications, to think about how do we share this problem and share our learnings with a larger audience. So there is many ways, intersections for brands to really get involved with this work, because again, like I said earlier, it's going to take so many of us, right, doing this and repeating this message for it to really hit home and for lasting lasting change to happen.
And to build off, oh, sorry.
Oh, please, Sarah, go right ahead. I think we're going to segue into audience questions after you make your point, because I think that we're already starting to hit on a couple of them, which is so fantastic. But Sarah, please go right ahead.
Okay, I'll go really quickly. I just wanted to build on Angela's point, because in Newark, where we were founded and we're still headquartered, we started the Newark Anchor Collaborative, which really looks at what is the purchasing power, the hiring power of the anchor institutions. And out of the 19 anchor institutions in just the city of Newark, we found there was $1 billion worth of purchasing power. And so we've been working very closely with all of our institutions, including ours, about how do we build a small business ecosystem that can procure these contracts from large institutions? How do we make sure that not only we're looking at high growth business models, but also at the smaller, more local and community-based mom and pop kind of small businesses in the neighborhoods, to really think about what's that entire supply chain looking like. And now we have a commitment at the statewide level that Governor Murphy just put together with the New Jersey CEO Council on increasing procurement across the state of New Jersey, using the model that we created in Newark as well around that. And it's all based off of the Mayor Baraka's initiative of Hire by Live Newark, which is to purchase more, hire more Newarkers, and then also incentivize more people to come live in Newark as well too.
Thank you so much for diving into that. I'd love to talk a little bit more about Prudential's work in Newark later in the conversation, because it's just such a fantastic case study and example of how brands can find what their place is, where they can activate, and where they can just really do the best work where they are. It's just really such a fantastic example. But I'd love to dive into audience questions really quickly. We want to make sure we have enough time for that. We already have a couple that have come in. One, Dr. Jackson, you already began to speak to a little bit actually, but we have some folks who are wondering about how to make that case internally about really activating on this work. You know, how can you make the case for not only for D&I internally, but for really driving this impact work in the communities where you do business? You know, we all know about this being the right thing to do, but often when you're having those internal conversations, you need to be able to pull from some of this other, you need to pull from something else, you need to make that case. Does anyone else have any advice about how folks might start to do that?
I can start and just give an example. We're working with a fast casual restaurant, and their whole ethos is thinking about how they invest in entry-level workers. But what they've never done, they've never created a business case around it. So with working with their head of HR, what we did was first to understand what is their cost of like leaving a seat open when someone leaves, right? And knowing those costs, and then also understanding at the same time, how much would it cost to train someone? People assume that it might be more. People assume that if you invest in an entry-level worker, that they're just going to leave, so it's not worth the return on investment. And so what we're doing together as a collaborative is trying to prove that case. And part of the Future of Work Brand Challenge is to also show that, so we can start measuring, like, how much does it cost to train someone? How much time does it take? Were they actually really placed? And was it at a higher wage? And so that data will help us then take the cases from these 25,000 job seekers to the employers that are in their community to say, okay, this is how many people we trained, this is what we placed, this is some of the outcomes. And so that helps paint a picture and also demystify, right? And get away from some of the like myths and narratives that you have out there about who should be invested in and who's not. And you think most employers are spending 80% of their professional development dollars on their highest wage earners. And so we're really going to need to change that if we're thinking about shifting systems and like power imbalances.
On that, from our perspective, one of the things that we found in our research is that most low-wage workers get into trouble because they have emergencies that come up. And those emergencies, there's no savings or there's no anything there to actually protect them. And we've been working with a number of companies to work on how do we create emergency savings fund for those workers to increase their sustainability in those jobs so that they can actually be a contributing member of the workforce for a long time. And if you don't address those type of issues, then you're going to have trouble with your pipeline of workers, particularly those that are in the retail trades, et cetera. And so we've been working with a group of corporations to actually think about how would you actually improve the working conditions for those low-wage workers so that they actually can move up the ladder instead of just moving out of the company altogether. And so we found as well, as Dr. Jackson has stated, that the huge savings, the case is made by itself. You don't really have to make the case. By making small investments on the front end, you can actually save the company huge dollars on the back end by retaining the employees and nurturing those employees that you have.
And I guess I would just add very quickly from a corporate side, if you're looking for research, there are organizations like CECP, Catalyst, and others who have data that speak to D&I and the impact it has both on your organization from a recruitment and retention standpoint as you look at your employees, but also what the impact is on your business from an external facing, consumer facing perspective as well. So there's research out there to support the premise and understanding that we're working under that's there that would help you with any conversation you're having about how it helps to drive the bottom line.
And the only thing I'll add to that is, when you're trying to find the intersection of societal impact and business impact, it's what's the issue area or the place that you're focused in. Because I do think those are two parallel tracks. We have a heavy focus in New York because we're founded and we're headquartered here, but we are a international business. So we also have focus areas in other cities. And so you can go very narrow into a place and really think about what are the benefits of creating a thriving neighborhood, which is attraction of employees, retention of employees, being able to create a small business ecosystem that can be your supply chain. There's a lot of cost analysis that you can do around that, but then there's also the issue areas. What are the issues? What are the products, services, programs that your company provides? And what's that issue area that can intersect with that drives both societal and business outcomes? And I think, for us as a financial services company, we're looking at wealth building products. How do more low-income individuals have access to financial assets and tools that can help build their wealth? That directly ties back to our own products and services. And I think the one thing that the pandemic has really highlighted this past year is that you can't just focus on high wealth individuals. So many people, millions of people filing for unemployment because they simply just didn't have enough emergency savings. So if you are not building the worker resiliency of the entire workforce, whether they are frontline workers all the way up to your corporate employees, we're not going to have a strong economy. And then that has negative returns for all businesses and companies across the board.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I think that really speaks to another audience question that we had, where it's really, hey, if my company is very singularly focused on what we do, right? The audience member who asked this question, their workplace is all about volunteering. That's their central focus. And so it's kind of tough to draw in, how can we figure out how to focus on this other topic? We know we want to take this on. We know we want to do more around equity, but everyone on our team is so eye on the prize, so focused on this one thing that we do. I'm wondering if any of y'all have any quick advice to share about how to really figure out what you can bring in about causes that you really want to take on and bring in the work that you're already doing and align those two things together.
I do think there's a way to do both, right? So there are organizations out there that are working in racial equality and social injustice that if you have a culture of service and volunteerism at your company, you can certainly engage with those organizations. That's what we did at ESPN and the larger Walt Disney Company last summer. Start to identify who some of those partners are. So, for example, as we were leading up to the election last fall, who are the organizations that were out there talking about and ensuring that people of color had rights to the polls, had information about voting, were educated and informed about their ballots. So we worked with those local organizations, be it the NAACP, Equal Justice Initiative, and others, to really inform ourselves, but also to engage our employees who could serve as virtual callers for people to ensure that they had their ballots, right? So I do believe there is a way you can accomplish both by identifying the right nonprofit organizations and partners that are out there every day on the front line working in the space of racial equality and social injustice, that are looking for a way to engage large companies like our own and their employees in a way. And you can do it virtually, and when we get back to some quote unquote normalcy, in-person experiences. So it really is about evaluating the right partners to help you achieve those goals.
I also think that it's about competitive advantage, meaning the companies that aren't really looking at this and taking action on it are going to be at a disadvantage, both with their customers and in their ability to continue their operations, given the demographic shifts that are going on in America. And so it It is not just the right thing to do. It is the thing that you need to do to stay competitive in the marketplace. So this is not something you do because it's nice. You do it because it's important for your company to do well and to be sustainable in the future. And those companies that are doing this, and there are many that are really pushing ahead in terms of their competitive position in the marketplace today.
And if I can add a concrete example of where it could just start from volunteering and grow bigger. So one of our businesses, we have a real estate investment business, and they came to us saying, like, we want to, invest in a cause and partner with an organization. And so we ultimately paired them up with Youth Build, which is an organization that helps young people between the ages of 15 and 24 get their high school degree, because most of them have dropped out, and train them in the construction trade. So it was a nice mission alignment. And it just started off as quarterly activities. Employees knew every quarter there was going to be an activity with Youth Build across the country, because we have office locations across. And it started off that. And now 5-6 years later, we're looking at how do we bring in these Youth Build students as interns for the business, which they would have never looked at these alternative pipelines, because they typically only look at 4-year college degree. We're also talking about how did it actually start to change cultures and mindsets within the business for senior leaders to engage, to be mentors to these young people. So I would say, if you obviously, all companies need to provide a wide variety of volunteer opportunities, but then also hone in on a couple of campaigns or partnerships that you can really build out the substance with, and you'll get to some of the I&D goals and some of the social impact things. They're having Youth Build now come in and do racial equity kind of sessions and workshops that are not your typical bias or anti-racism training, but it's grounded in something that business has invested in, so it means more to them. And so I think as corporations, because many times a lot of us don't have the large dollars that a private foundation has, but it's looking at what are the capabilities within our business that we can help leverage. And with that real estate investment business, not only are they donating their employee time and talent, but they're also making connections to the developers that they're investing in and say, hey, would you mind taking a look at these Youth Build students for potential internships and jobs? They're looking at their clients. And so they're providing pathways that we may not be providing financially, but are building upon the initial just volunteer engagements that we had.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for our audience members for sharing your questions. If you have any other questions for our panelists, feel free to reach out to us on social media. We'll do our best to get some answers for you. But I'd love to dive back in really quickly and touch on something from you, Gary. I know that you have said a lot, you speak a lot about some of these big, bold ideas that are really necessary to drive racial and economic equality forward, things like reparations or baby bonds. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about your perspective there, and if you feel that brands can play any role in promoting ideas like this.
Absolutely. In fact, I talked about the children's savings account, which is a cousin to the baby bonds. So baby bonds are really an investment in all American children that would happen at birth, and then resources would develop over their lifetime. And then when they get 18, they can buy a house, they can buy start a business, et cetera. But they'd have to use those resources to invest in building wealth. And so this is a big idea. It's in Congress right now. It's going through the process. But if we were able to do this, we would be able, in our lifetime, to close the racial wealth gap in our lifetime if we implemented a project like this that was universal in its goal, so everybody participates, but is targeted to specific populations based on how they're situated to opportunity. This is the time for America to live up to its full promise. And corporate sector plays a huge role in how this society actually operates. And so I want to take my hat off to those that are doing this, but I also want to challenge those that actually need to step up to the plate now. And it's so critical for you to do so. So the work we're doing across a lot of different platforms really is about how do we create a more inclusive society and a more inclusive economy. You can join this fight with us. And I assure you that if you do, you will be pleased with outcomes, because your workforce will actually be better and different. The place that you have in the view of your customers will improve, and your outcomes overall will shift because you're serving the new demographics that are coming into America.
Thank you so much. Dr. Jackson, I'd love to pose a similar question to you, just in the sense of, if brands are looking to do more here, they're looking for ways to activate. I'm wondering, from your perspective, how you feel brands can be of best use to, to nonprofits, to community groups, people who have been out there doing this work for many years. How can brands really step in and fill voids that are needed to push this movement forward?
So one, I just want to go back to, Angela, when she was talking about the work that ESPN did with My Brother's Keeper. Imagery and video and storytelling is so important, because when we talk about systems change, a lot of times we say, oh, we're going to throw money at something, or, we'll try, policy, et cetera. But really what we're trying to change are hearts and minds. And so when we think about brands and their ability to do that and to pull consumers in and to bridge differences, that's where we really need. And you see a lot of community organizations, small entrepreneurs or small leaders, they don't have the budget for those things to really tell their story, to show different images, right? Than you'd see on a television. When you Google black male, what comes up there? And that's where we can use brand to help us tell a different narrative of why, again, this is important. They see it as like morally important, right? But also why they think that for economic and business, and also for the greater good of society, right? For our country and democracy. And we're seeing that now, that we have to begin bridge building. We have to work across difference and be able to tell the stories of why from different points of view.
Mm-hmm. Angela, I'd love to go over to you really quickly and just to advise a little bit on, along these same lines. If brands are out there, they want to do more, but they're struggling a little bit to figure out what's mine to do. What can I really do to make a difference here? Do you have any advice for brands that might be in that position based on what you've seen?
Sure, absolutely. I think a big part of it also goes back to your culture, understanding your culture and your competencies of your company. So what is it that you think you can offer, to understand that better, to understand what the needs are in the community? It's enough to sit insular inside of the big corporate walls, but to really understand what's happening in Black and brown communities, and having stakeholders and partners that you can work with, like the ones that are on the panel today, to help you better understand the needs and what needs to be addressed. And I think most importantly, anyone going into this type of work needs to understand it has to be a long-term commitment. Change is not going to come overnight. We've been, this racial inequity and social injustice has existed for hundreds of years in this country. It's not going to change overnight. So if your solve is to come in and make $1,000 and to walk away and say you've done your part, I would say don't even start, because you can't be effective that way and make systemic change unless you come into a longer term investment. And then secondly, back to Dr. Jackson's point, for us, as she mentioned the example, it really was important for us beyond just the funding, but to help to change the conversation, to change the narrative, to change the perceptions. Us infusing dollars was not going to be enough if we didn't change people's minds and heart. And a lot of that had to do with lending our brand and our voice to create the brand narrative that you saw earlier, to help do that, so that people start to view these young boys and men of color in a different light. Who they, as Angela said, when you might Google, one image came up. We wanted to change that dichotomy of what that looked like and what that meant, to really start to resonate in people's hearts and minds. So I think that's really important, is the long-term investment and being part of more than just the financial conversation, but the conversation around changing the paradigm and the narrative that exists in communities today.
I love that. It really is so much about the long term, about keeping this work up. Sarah, on that note, I'd love to pose a similar question to you. Based on some of the work that Prudential has done in Newark, some of the other programs that you're running, same question. What do you think that brands can do if they're struggling to figure out what's there to do, how they can activate? What advice would you have for them based on your work in this area?
Yeah, I echo what all of my fellow panelists have said, but I think about it from two perspectives of what companies can do on an internal perspective and then an external. External, building off of what Angela said, I think you have to really commit to building meaningful relationships. It can't just be a financial grant and you say, do the good work, but really sitting down with them and saying, what are the challenges you're facing? What's keeping you up at night? What are some of the assets and capabilities that we can bring to the table? Whether it's you're going to help them on a pro bono project, maybe they need a new marketing website, maybe they need an HR overhaul, whatever that could be your employee time and talent that you can provide them. and really trying to help solve this challenge in the issue area together. And I think that creates more meaningful impact than just kind of spreading yourself thin. From an internal perspective, I would say if there's not a lot of external donations and contribution dollars you have, what are the policies and practices that you can change internally? I will say that Prudential just, over the last several years have started to look at non-traditional talent pipelines. That did not exist before. Everyone had to have a 4-year college degree. Those are the small kind of policy and practice changes. Our procurement, now having a commitment to procure locally in Newark at a certain percentage, that's something that will change beyond, our lifetimes at the company. And so think about what are some of the internal practice and policies that will have legacy impact that can change and help, reduce the barriers around some of these inequities that have existed for so long.
Absolutely. And we're nearing our hour mark here, but I'd love to close with one final question for all of our panelists. If you could choose one thing that you'd like to see us accomplish with respect to these issues this year, what would that be? Gary, I'd love to start with you.
Well, I think first, follow through on your commitments. There's been a lot of commitments made, but the proof is in the pudding. I'd also like to say that just because you're smart in what you do and you got brilliant people in your company doesn't mean you understand the community or the folks that you're trying to support. So I would say actually reaching out and getting trusted advisors to help you along the way, because these are complex adaptive issues that actually will take you getting and being in a learning mode and in a listening mode to understand, and then you can act from there. But just acting on your own using the MOs that you have may not be the best way to intervene within communities.
Dr. Jackson, please go right ahead. Oh, I think you're muted. It was bound to happen at some time.
There we go. I want to double click on the call to ask businesses to keep their commitments and also to be transparent about them. Recently, I received an email from Comcast and they were reporting on how they have the milestones to the commitment that they've made. And I think that that's really important to have transparency and accountability. The second thing is if I had my magic wand, my wish would be for all employers to really think about taking away the 4-year degree as the credential of choice and considering other credentials. In this moment, we're going to have a lot of accelerated learning programs that are coming and being evolved, and to take a look at those non-traditional candidates, because that means that we're going to get more people who have access to more wealth, right? If they can get jobs with sustaining wages.
Absolutely. Angela, please go ahead.
A couple of things I think I would say is, first, I think we all need to agree internally in our own conversations within our own companies that there is a divide and divisiveness that exists in this country today. I think some people are still struggling with that, to be really candid and honest, that there is a divide and distinct divisiveness that we all have to acknowledge, first of all. And then secondly, as you evaluate your culture and your competencies, what can you realistically do and commit to that? Make some formal commitment in writing. And then, as I think Dr. Jackson said earlier, transparency about what you achieve and what the impact and milestones are as you mirror and make those movements forward. Be transparent about what you've done, what you've accomplished, and what your shortcomings are.
Absolutely. Sarah, can you please close us out here?
Yeah, I'll just quadruple everybody's data and transparency. I think that's 100% how do you keep companies accountable. And then if I had to pick just one, I really do see that we'll see majority diverse workforces across many of the companies at all levels.
We know the bar is so much higher now, and we'd all love to see just more activation on these commitments, more long-term forward thinking, and just really staying together in this. So I hope that everyone learned a lot today. I know that I did, and thank you all so much for taking the time to share your perspectives with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.